Start anyway. Even though, Steve, I do have to say, I could sit here with you for hours and just chat to you, hearing, Steve spent a day with Elon Musk talking about AI and, the type of risks that it could have for society. But Steve, you're a professor at UC Berkeley, School of Innovation. You've written plenty of books. One of them, which is very, very impressive, is The Coming Age of AI and Machine Learning and what it's going to do to traditional power systems and boundaries and nations and so on and so forth around the world. Very impressive. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Dex is on screen. I hope everybody can see him. I can't see him behind me yet. Hopefully we'll have, there he is. Hi, Dex. Dex actually sticking with Elon, used to be the head of communications at SpaceX, speechwriter for the UN Secretary General, very impressive, and is now the head of comms and marketing at Google's DeepMind. So Dex, also thank you for being here.
Sure, good to be here.
And we get to talk about chip away, a tiny little issue. We'll do it very quickly because we don't have much time. It's called AI. It's gone from sci-fi to reality TV. I'm going to save us all the risk mongering and so on and so forth and start us off because I think, Steve, you've been dealing with AI since essentially the moment I looked at Windows 95. So maybe you could give us a little bit of an outlook. How far has it actually come, right? Let's move away from the media and the headlines. How far has it actually come?
Yeah, Alex, I hate to think I'm that old, but yeah, AI has been in my life for a long time of different forms. It's come really, really far. And I think probably the simplest way to think about that distance that's been traversed has been from a world of rules, which is where we started, to a world of predictions, which is where we were maybe a year and a half ago when we were talking about machine learning and remember big data, to a world of foundation models and generation. And that's really we could go into tons of detail about how that technology has evolved and the way in which there's been a sort of a constant sine wave of hype and then profound disillusionment and an AI winter. And we could talk about the way in which expert systems, where we try to extract rules from people who are really, really good at certain complicated skills, write down those rules, put them in a computer program, and then essentially replicate those people and spread their best practice systematically across an environment. All that stuff was incredibly interesting, but I guess it's almost exactly a year ago now. Foundational models became the sine qua non of what we now call AI for the masses. And what's really important about these foundational models is that they are more generalizable and that they're conversational. Prediction models, machine learning, classification systems could say, this is a dog and this is a cat in an image. It didn't talk to you. It just classified something.
So essentially it's become accessible.
Accessible to everybody in a very natural human way. And I think that really changes a lot about the way we interact with AI, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in those terms as well. I think the other thing that's really important about it is this notion of what we're starting to see the glimpses of now in practice, but are going to be really clear in the next, say, 6 months, I think, or less. Multimodal models that move between voice, text, image, song, poetry, as if there's no barrier between them. And even you and I, we're talking now, if we were singing, it would be we'd have to flip a switch and move into a song. We can do that if you want.
You don't want to hear it from me.
But the machines don't see any distinct. We're just essentially using the same foundational model and having it interact with humans in whatever way the human wants to interact.
Super.
I'm sure Dex will have tons more to say about that, but that's what I think is going to be the next surprise.
Very interesting. Dex, why don't we jump in there? So is that a future we should be excited about or a future we should be worried about?
I think we should all be really excited about it. I'm obviously coming back from the perspective of somebody who's leading communications for, an AI lab. But, I think folks who work in communications, we're all drawn to this line of work because we, I think care deeply about society, and you have to have a reason why you choose. AI is giving us now, at this moment in time, is a set of tools that, I think are going to have extraordinarily exciting applications, not just for, things in our own lives and in our work as communicators, but really in helping to solve some of those big problems that the organizations that we represent, the industries that we're working for, have been trying to really try and solve for a long, long time. So like actually the applications are much vaster than chatbots, of course, and the things that generative AI will do. Like actually there is, I think, a whole set of, models and applications that are much more specialized, which will do things which are still incredibly transformative. And what that means for communicators is obviously what we're going to talk about in this session. The applications are just extraordinary and vast, and they make the kinds of changes we saw in the world after the mobile transition, and what arrived in the information revolution, which we all lived through, look actually much simpler to understand.
Dex, I think you just led into something very interesting, because I think everybody's really interested to know from the two of you, what are the next big real life applications that are coming, right? Because ChatGPT is still a bit clunky, now incredibly powerful, but a bit clunky. What's next? Help us look into the future a little bit.
Well, I'll start. So the first thing I want to say is the next thing we're going to see is the 10x rule. You know the 10x rule?
Give it to us.
The 10x rule about technology is that you will spend 10 times as much money and time reorganizing yourself and your organization to take advantage of the technology than the technology itself costs. And I think probably lots of people in this room are already experiencing that. But if you've done it 3x, you still got 7x to go. So that's what this year is going to be about. On the technology side, I think it's actually a little simpler. So these are things we're already, maybe three things I'd emphasize really quickly. Connectivity to agents through APIs. So we're already seeing this. Obviously, you guys are doing it at Google. Right now, I might go into ChatGPT and say, tell me how to get from Rhinebeck, New York to Toronto, Canada easily. And it'll give me an answer, but then I actually need to go take those actions. When the machine is connected to agents and it can take those actions for me, it really changes the nature of the interaction. I walk into my house and I say, God, it feels a little cold in here. And the next thing I know, the heat has gone up by 2 degrees. Right? So the connection to agents, I think, is really important. The second piece that I think we're going to see much more clearly kind of follows on what I was saying earlier about multimodal. I think that, like, does anyone really get excited about communicating with machines through a keyboard and a screen? Like, we call it human-computer interaction, and to put the technical term on it, it sucks. It's horrible. We don't want to communicate with machines through keyboards and screens. We want to communicate through vision, through speech, and so on and so forth. And I think the question people are going to start asking is this. I'll put it this way. If my product could speak to you, what would it say? Not what would I say to you about my product, but what would the product say to you? What would it sing to you? To go back to multimodal.
Very interesting. I'm not sure, and I need to think about that. Dex?
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece about multimodality is key. Obviously, I think a lot of people have been very excited by, the text interfaces, the chatbots that, we've started using. Obviously, like, we live in a time where already, the most engaging content online is video. And that's been at the centerpiece of communication strategies over the last few years. At least any that, are sort of trying to reach, huge scale and engagement. Thinking about the applications for AI in other types of content, in video, in audio, in being able to bring all of that together, using these multimodal systems. I think that's obviously one, huge application. I think the other piece, though, is just scale. Obviously, like, some folks, and those who are early adopters have jumped right in, with both feet and are using, the latest and greatest tools that are available from lots of different companies. The vast majority of people in society, the vast majority of companies are not yet using AI at scale. Like, it very much is still something that feels like it's something that's nibbling around the edges at bigger problems. And a lot of people are still trying to understand, is this something I should really adopt at scale? And over the next couple of years, I think the answer is going to be very, very emphatic there. And we're going to see a lot more applications that, make it obvious that we do need to we need to jump in, with both feet. And I think then probably the last piece really is just going back to those more specialized models. This is the piece that's actually much more complex for communicators, I think, is what are the changes in society that are going to be driven as AI is picked up by different communities, by different industries, and then how do we have to respond to those changes? That's a piece that is still a little bit down the road, but it's already an area that we need to start thinking about.
Can I follow up on something Dex just said? I think it's very interesting. How many people remember the metaverse? Okay. So let's talk about the metaverse for just a moment in that context. I guess it was called Facebook at the time. Announces something called the metaverse. We're going to spend $10 billion on an advanced technology project that produces things that nobody wants, that are clunky, that are unrealistic, that are 10 years out in the future. The metaverse is coming back due to generative AI. The one thing that was really, I think, the rate-limiting step to creating metaverse-style interactions, which is really just like another almost like parallel form of society that runs alongside what we currently do in rooms like this. You had to make lots of really high-quality assets, visual, 3D, avatars, stories, and so very, very expensive to do when you're talking to a game designer. But guess what Gen AI can do? Create all those assets really fast, really inexpensively. And I think you already see Meta's strategy shifting to take advantage of that new connectivity. So just to complexify what Dex said, we're going to have to deal with the impact of this technology in the kinds of interactions we have here and every single day and at the grocery store and so on and so forth. And at the same point, we're going to have to bring back the conversations we were starting to have about interacting in 3D immersive computing, where those environments are going to be populated by Gen AI created assets. It's going to get really complicated really fast.
I agree with you on the metaverse. Who has seen the movie Ready Player One? Hand up. Okay, not many hands. The rest of you make it some airplane movie watching. I think Ready Player One actually does articulate and visualize that concept incredibly well. And it is around the corner, right? It literally, this is not 30 years out or 20 or 10 years out. This is much closer. And I think we'll actually have a few billion people who will jump into that and spend a considerable amount of their lifetime in it and enjoying it. But Dex, I'd like to pick up something that you said. You mentioned society. When President Biden announced he's going to run re-election, bracket open, probably the biggest communications battle coming up in the world, also from a budget perspective next year in the US. About 30 seconds later, the RNC, the Republican Party, ran an ad in the US online. And everybody knows the little banner at the bottom that says, this is paid for by the RNC, not sponsored by the candidate, da, 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 da. This ad said something different. It said, this is paid for and sponsored by the RNC. It is 100% AI generated and no human being was involved in its creation. I suggest later on you go on YouTube, just RNC Biden AI ad, and you'll be scared how good it is. Next year, we're going to see $2.5 billion in advertising money from two political parties, essentially leveraging AI to push societal conversations. Dex, that's obviously, Google DeepMind is very much at the front of, also in Washington and Brussels, of really pushing forward and saying, listen, we need to have a meaningful conversation about how far can we go and where boundaries must be installed. Give us your point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I previously also worked at Facebook, and I was at Google before that. There's a lot of issues where people expect tech companies and the folks who are building the tools, to have a point of view and a set of solutions that will go and solve that problem. And there are obviously things we do need to demand from innovators. Absolutely, approaching the development of these technologies in a way that responds to these kinds of concerns, to the potential misuses of technology. All of that is absolutely critical. And, that's a piece that, at Google DeepMind, we invest a lot in. One of the pieces that, I'm pretty excited about, we just announced a few weeks ago, which is a technology called SynthID. And this is something which is what we refer to as AI watermarking technology. Basically, it means that this system can detect when an image has been generated by one of Google's image generating models, or if it's something that was created by a person. And so that's a piece of technology, right, which really gets to the heart of some of the challenges around misinformation. There was a research study which came out last year from Lancaster University, which I absolutely love sharing the data points on with people because they're so astounding. They found that actually when people were asked to look at AI-generated faces of humans versus actual pictures of humans, they found the faces of AI-generated people about 8% more trustworthy on average. And only in about 48% of cases could people actually tell the difference between AI-generated humans and real portraits. And so, that's a situation where, as a company, we've responded to this challenge with another piece of technical innovation, which we think will be a little part of the solution. Now, of course, these problems are much bigger, though. Going back to social networking, going back to all the challenges we faced in the last generation of technology, the last big platform shift, these are societal issues. And we need policymakers, we need researchers, we need civil society, we need industry to all be working together to go and solve these things. You cannot just have a technical solution to a problem that you assume is just technical, when actually there's going to be a whole bunch of conflated issues, right? And particularly when it comes to things like bad actors, right? You can build tools that have perfectly good intentions, which then people will try to use, whether they're individuals all the way up to nation state level, to actually apply them in ways that are very, very damaging to society and very destructive potentially. That's where you need some level of action, which obviously goes well beyond purely the tech industry. So actually, just in the next few weeks, the UK government is hosting, the first global AI safety summit here in London. And that's a moment when a lot of leaders from around the tech ecosystem and around the AI ecosystem are coming together to try and identify how do we build a true international consensus that takes action on these issues. And that's something obviously Google DeepMind will be part of that conversation.
Critically important summit. I mean, Steve, when we hear that, and as we hear that as communicators, truth and the interpretation of events is something I think all of us work and spend part of our lifetime on. Given the fact that there's a new actor essentially on the playing field, are we heading into a future where truth is actually no longer going to exist?
Well, I have a slightly different view, which is going to be actually quite a bit more optimistic. I think human beings have struggled to tell the difference between truth and falsehood for a long time. We're pretty bad at it, and we've sort of muddled through. And look, I have a ton of colleagues who are, this is not meant to sound critical or overly critical, or they're kind of catastrophizing this story. Deep fakes are going to take over the internet and no one will ever be telling them. We don't tell the truth from falsehood that well anymore. And I actually think it's the wrong problem to try to solve. And I'll put it this way. We seem to be obsessed right now with saying this was made by a human and this was made by a machine. That is a terrible proxy for what is true and what is false. In fact, in many cases, humans are really good at lying. In many cases, I might be more trustworthy of something made by a machine than made by a human. Maybe I should. But actually, here's what I think we should. People probably heard of the red flag warnings. This was a conversation going on years ago about if the car is driven by a robot, it ought to have a red flag on it so humans can tell that the car is driven by a robot. But given the way most of the people near where I live drive, I would much rather the car. That red flag to me says that's a safer car. And I think some of the same may be true. So look, one way to think about this, another way to think about this, just a kind of alternative is, I do think we're moving into a world that is a little bit like what cybersecurity people call zero trust. Where in fact the norm is, you just don't assume, someone's inside the perimeter, you don't assume that once they're in the perimeter, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and they are who they say they are. In fact, everybody is being challenged all the time. That's what zero trust means in a security setting. And I think, rightly or wrongly, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing, we're going to move to something a little bit more like a zero trust communications environment. And instead of saying we have to be more trusted or be more trustworthy, we're actually going to assume that people don't trust us and prove our point in a much more profound and grounded way. And I think it really raises the stakes for some of the work that we share interest in, for example, around reputation. I can't, but how powerful is it? That doesn't sound like something Alex Geyser would say, given what I know about him. That may be the most important moment of the interaction where your reputation comes into conflict with something which was made by a machine or made by a human, I don't care, but doesn't fit. And that's the moment where somebody perks up their eyes and says, maybe that isn't quite right. And proof points, all the proof points that we bring to conversations before we're even challenged, not afterwards, before. There's a terrible word, it's called pre-bunking, which is like debunking, but in advance, but the concept is right.
Well, define yourself, otherwise other people will define you, and that happened, that was true way before AI.
It's just going to happen faster now.
You mentioned something interesting, which is security, and we did a little bit of a survey beforehand amongst you on AI and who's deployed AI so far. And I'd like to ask Dasha Stewart from Allegiant to come up. Thank you. Give her a quick hand. Dasha. Thank you for coming up. And you shared something very interesting in the survey, and I'll let you share it. But maybe something I did not know which company it was and what your company does, and I thought that was very interesting. It is one of the biggest security companies on the planet that essentially merges, I'll say it in my words, the real world with the digital world, because you create security systems for buildings and so on and so forth. So think you walk in somewhere, you need your fingerprint in order to open a door, and so on and so forth, with a pass to get in somewhere. You're the world market leader in that, and you run communications, so you're at the nexus of data and the real world and security.
Well, we can't quite make that claim in terms of world leader. However, we are amazing. So if you look at the doorway right there, we're producing the door, the frame, all the hardware that you see on it, but increasingly in an interconnected digital world, we're interfacing with all of these systems. We have the credentials that are allowing you to come in and out, if you have the right credential, to the right spaces wherever you go, from your home, the hospital, the school, or right here. So that's the sort of world that we live in. So AI, to be honest, large language models, it wasn't a question for us of whether it mattered or whether we would participate, because we had been participating for a long time, both in terms of how our products are performing, as well as thinking about how we can solve customer problems through using all of these technologies. So it wasn't a question. However, those were experts who were creating the solutions. So you talked about mass AI. So now we're in a world where with generative AI, we're democratizing the access to these tools. That's a different shift. And so for our company, where our mission is pioneering safety and security, that's often a guardrail for us to think about how do we navigate a new question, a new technology. And so when we thought about our approach, that had to be one of the fundamentals. But first of all, show of hands. How many of you have a defined policy for generative AI? And how many of you have told, I'm seeing a few hands, so let's do that one first. Okay, we have quite a few. Of those, how many of you have articulated what your preferred tool of choice would be for your employees? Okay, so fewer of that. So what I would say, we heard a quote this morning from the Honorable Governor General, who said, "You can't be neutral on a moving train," which really struck me that that's really what we're talking about. That if you haven't created guardrails for participating safely, think about it. The use cases for generative AI are expanding at an exponential rate. So if you haven't created those common sense guardrails, your people are using this technology. They're just not using it with the guardrail. So that was our starting point. We started with experimentation. We didn't leap to, oh yes, we're going to leap in and automatically make this available. We started with experimentation. Our data analytics team was fantastic there. They created a closed loop option for us, or closed wall, I believe, is another way of thinking of that, where we could get groups like mine, the corporate communications group, the HR group, IT, business groups, just to try experimenting it. All right, here's a tool, do a use case, try something. Take a long form article and create a 2-minute video script from it. How does that work, right? That sort of thing. Where does it hallucinate? What are the things that you're going to have to think about? So that was huge. And we spent about 45 days on experimentation, then taking the outcome of that, creating a white paper, talking to the executive team, and then saying, yes, this is something that we do want to make available, the opportunity side, for all of our employees where it makes sense. We're not going to push everyone to use it because it also needs to be relevant for the job that's to be done. So our guardrails consisted of a policy, and I'll tell you a little bit about the principles there. We also found that we needed a light, user-friendly use case, and we needed an expert playground to work from. And within that, for us, the closed loop was critical. And again, it goes to the policy that we created. We also created a guild for the super users so they can learn and they can expand and they can create that best practice. We trained everyone who was interested with prompts. It's a new discipline to create a prompt for generative AI and to really get a great outcome out of that. And now we're expanding, we're innovating, and we're leveraging what we've learned. So our approach, we walked before we ran, but we were clear that we wanted to participate. We looked at how do we start, not with the CEO leading off and saying this is what we're going to do, but rather starting with authentic voices, the people who were already using it. We brought in our chief security officer, the CISO, as well as the privacy officer to talk about their reality, talked about empathy and different perspectives. So we talked about what are they concerned about so that people would understand why the guardrails were needed. And then the CEO came in last just to put the bow on it. We reduced the options, so we picked two tools. We picked one that was for the general user and another one that was right for purpose for our engineers. And then a gentle redirect if you went to one that was outside of that system. So an automated way of doing that. And we also looked at the data because people are like, really, do we have to have a policy now? Well, we looked at how many people were using it, and the data told us that yes, they're already going there. So principles, and then I'll wrap up. We want to protect personal information and privacy, so the policy had to bake that in. Protect intellectual property, our trade secrets, and our future intellectual property. The law is yet to be written here, both on the privacy side and the IP side, so we had to think future forward. Don't infringe on the rights of others. Don't steal their property. That was a major principle for us. As a user, a content creator, be accountable. So the same clearance processes hold up. You still have to defend your claims. You are responsible for what you put out there, and the human still needs to be in the loop. And then finally, on reducing cybersecurity risk, we need to know what you're signing up for. So we needed to have enterprise solutions, and we needed to vet the solutions that we brought forward. So that was our approach. Your approach may be different, and the principles that relate to you, but starting rather than working in a vacuum would be the most important takeaway I would give.
Well said, well said. Well, we'll now open it up. I'm sure there's going to be a few questions, or I see hands up, so I'll point to it, whichever hand I see first. And also everybody joining virtually, please let us know if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll bring you into the conversation.
Thank you. Christine Barney from RBB Communications. My question's for Dasha. When you put the policies in place, what are you doing to track compliance in terms of how do you know that people are staying in the guidelines that you've created?
Well, certainly in terms of which tools they use, we can easily see that. And through our IT systems, we're able to take care of that. And then just like any other code of conduct that you have, any policy that you have, it's also to speak up, both for your peers and your work group, and to call out, leverage your values so that you're calling out the behaviors to make sure that everything's going through the system and to ask the right questions.
Very nice. Anybody else with a question? Right back there.
Hi, Ray Jordan with Echo Research. Another term we haven't heard a lot lately, along with the metaverse, has been the technological singularity. And I know 30 or 40 years back, that was a very compelling and scary concept. And I know Ray Kurzweil, I think, talked about this being emerging by 2045. And I'm wondering, are we like on the slip slope exponentially towards this singularity, or are these separate phenomena?
Steve, you want to take a crack at that?
Ooh, I'll take a crack at it. So when I hear the word singularity, I think of what it means in physics, which is like what happened before doesn't matter. It's the beginning of an entirely new history of humanity. Honestly, I think it's a big deal. It's an important technology. It's a very significant tool. But actually, even all the things we've just talked about are still many of the same processes, many of the same problems, magnified, accelerated, and so on and so forth. It's going to feel like a singularity in the same way that the web did in 1995, in the same way that mobile did in 2007. But I think the concept of singularity, actually, it doesn't help you make any decisions, frankly. It just says like, wow, everything's different, exponential. Like, I spent enough time in Silicon Valley, 40 years, to hear people talk about this again and again, and maybe I just got bored of it, so forgive me. But I think humans are gonna, at the end of the day, we're gonna have to interact with our technology, and it isn't the beginning of some new machine-driven future. But it's a big deal.
Very encouraging. With another question over there.
Hi, Lori Taranishi with IQ360. My question's for Dosha. You mentioned the approach you took for creating principles. How do you apply those to your partners, vendors through your supply chain? And then also, how do you update your principles because this technology is changing day by day?
Great questions, Lori. For us, yes, absolutely. Throughout our supply chain, we do have business partner code of conducts, and we do include these guidelines among what our expectations are. It's transparency, right? Transparency and trust really is at the heart of so much that we're talking about. And then for updating, we've already updated our policy once. We've added a new tool, and we just launched them, let me think, at the middle of June. So we've already updated once you have to stay continually aware and vigilant. And we leverage a cross-functional perspective. It's not just IT, it's not just legal, it's not just corp comms, it's all of that together. As well as when the use cases start to come out, we learn and we understand how people, where the hunger is and what the opportunities are. And so you just do it every day, to be honest, and stay in close contact.
Awesome. We have two questions over here.
Hey, Rita Mann from University of Florida. First of all, thank you so much for the incredibly insightful panel. I have a question about using chatbot for relationship building purpose. We have seen that used for customer service, mainly for functional purposes. Is there a way to wire AI-powered tools like chatbot with human intelligence with PR mindset, and that they can be effective communicators to really help the PR team to build a relationship with different stakeholders? Do you see that possibility, and how will that impact the PR profession?
Dex, maybe one for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think chatbots will absolutely be something in the repertoire of communicators to help do a lot of different types of stakeholder engagement. So like you can absolutely imagine that like a chatbot and having conversational AI will help with certain types of outreach on certain types of content where things are like more sort of rote and routine. I would probably count myself as like a big skeptic that it's going to be something that will play a meaningfully larger or equally large role as humans in shaping those relationships, at least any time in like the next like 5-10 years. Like, I think people obviously are very good at building relationships, and people react very powerfully against any sort of like filter on being able to have that human to human contact. Like you see, the kind of reaction that you get when you, end up dealing with like a call center, right? Like nobody likes that experience. And now AI can play a role there, right? In like automating some of those interactions. Like actually probably when you call a call center now, you are actually dealing with AI that's optimizing and shaping a bunch of those interactions, figuring out who should be on the line with you. Can some of these things actually be punted over to systems rather than you actually having to deal with a human? But like, when it comes to the kinds of relationships we're shaping, the kind of high value work that communicators are doing, we're probably going to continue to need people driving those interactions, right? If you really want to invest in building enduring relationships of the kind that move the needle.
Very interesting. We do have a question before I go to the next question in the room. We do have a question from virtual, so we'll quickly jump there.
Hello, everyone. Takako Uyabu had a question, a very interesting question. She said that her company's direction is to embrace technology like AI, but she's getting immediate pressure from her CFO to deliver value. In other words, how do I reduce cost or headcount or generate revenue from this kind of use of technology? And she thinks it's going to take some time to really deliver tangible value, and would love to have anyone's advice from the panel on handling these conversations with her CFO.
I'll take a first crack at it. So I think that for me, there's a lesson going back to the mid-1990s where, remember, everybody was racing to put up a web page. And they paid a lot of money to things that were called like e-business integrators, Proxicom. Remember these companies, March for? None of them exist anymore, by the way. And then once they had the web page up, they started, well, what do we do with this web page? What value does it create? How are we going to sort of run it through the business? I actually think this pressure from CFOs earlier on to say, show me what you're doing, show me how it's going to create value, show me the investment case. It doesn't have to be tomorrow, but it also shouldn't be, well, we don't really know. It's going to be 10 years from now somewhere. So I actually think that that conversation is a good disciplining feature for folks in the technology community. Maybe I spend too much time, but like, we just have to jump in and we'll worry about the economics later. I actually think the conversation with CFO is good.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think this idea of proof of concepts and minimal viable product, whether it's an internal productivity opportunity or it's an actual product that you would commercialize, it's common sense that that's how we would approach any other major initiative or tool or resource. So why not do that here?
Interesting. Another question over there.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for our panel. I think this was very insightful. So I'm Vilma Lomaho. I'm an educator at a business school in Finland. I'm studying communication hijacks. So I would like for all four of you to play a futurist now and say, what are we assuming today about society and communication that is actually misleading us at the moment when it comes to the next few years? What do we need to change in our thinking to be ready for what AI is bringing about?
Very interesting. Dex, you're the furthest away, so you get to get first crack at it.
Oh, great. Excellent. I had a pretty skeptical view of a lot of communications activity that is carried out by lots of organizations, including all the places I've worked at in different ways. Definitely self-aware enough on that. I think as communicators and as leaders within different industries, we often delude ourselves into thinking people know a lot more about the things we're working on and care a lot more about those things. Like every organization is like working on important things, and we naturally assume that like the world is waiting to hear about these things, and like all we have to do is go and reach out, and like if we find the right combo of tactics, like we can absolutely get cut through. I mean, that's literally like what a lot of communications leaders spend all their time thinking about. And actually, I think we often don't recognize that in a world that is moving faster and faster and is becoming more and more complex by the day, and leading to much more elaborate structures in society and communities. Actually, the way in which we engage with people is going to become more and more difficult, and we need to fight harder than ever to unpack what is even the very straightforward value proposition of the work we do. And I go back to companies which I won't name from the last decade, which thought that we've got this mission, and they talk about it as something that is unequivocally good. Any reasonable person would agree with that. And all we have to do is go out there and talk about it, and people are going to be getting on board. And actually what they found is that lots of people were very, very opposed to that. Because, of course, the vast majority of people in the world are not sitting around waiting for, a company or an industry to save them. They're just trying to get through their day. They're trying to put food on the table. And so in a world where AI absolutely is going to be, I think, transformative, and it's going to unleash all sorts of possible new futures, it is going to make society move faster. It's going to make business move faster. We're going to have to go back to fundamentals. What makes a good story? Why should people care about it? How do I build a relationship that lasts with people? And really defend every part of our story, not just the new exciting piece, because people will forget about you really, really quickly.
Interesting. Dasha?
For me, what came to mind was creativity, that we're in polarization, that it's not either or, it's not the machine being creative or the human, but it's this ability to see each other as, or to see it as a co-pilot, a co-creator, that is a positive and not something to be fearful of.
What Dex and Dosha just said, with maybe one additional quick thought, which is I think it's really, really going to become very important for us to get serious about understanding and talking about how we share value between the incredible value that AI is going to create for the enterprise and what proportion and what pieces of that value are going to be shared with customers. Technology hasn't always done that really well. It's been incredibly valuable for technology companies, not always as much for, and I think there's a little bit of pushback against that all over the place now. So I think we're going to have to develop that point of view, a theory of shared value with this technology, and then we're going to have to talk about it to people. And I'd like to see communications professionals be in at the front end of that conversation, because you don't want to have to explain somebody else's theory. You want to build it from scratch.
So we're not going to run, we're going to sprint. I'll leave everybody with a little bit of brain candy, half answering the question. There was a gathering recently of some of the tech leaders in the world, so on and so forth. And afterwards, a bunch of them met for dinner, and the one battle they currently have going on between themselves is for the life companion. It's not a chat bot. There's a competition out there, and it's the most valuable real estate ever, which is the second voice in your head. You have yours, and at some point in time, you will get the opportunity to opt in to get a second voice into your head. And that will give you all access to all knowledge on the planet. And like you just said, it feels a bit cold in this room. Boom, gets warmer, so on and so forth. Let's not underestimate the amount of money, determination, and most of all, engineering going into exactly that right now. So as communicators, I took away from that, the way to communicate with human beings on the traditional sense and senses is going to essentially grow by one more sense, which is going to be a digital life companion that human beings, and I will side on this side of the metaverse. I think it will come, as will digital life companions. I think plenty of people here in the room would not raise their hand when saying I would actually use it. But if we would gen pop poll, and they're already being done, there actually is, it starts with combating loneliness. And the first essentially trials they're doing, what they're noticing is that voice is good to me and it's good for me. So it's a very interesting thought. Thank you for participating. Thank you for joining us. Dex, thank you very much for coming in and joining us. Steve and Dasha, you'll be available to everybody else afterwards. And I think there's the two next guides to the schedule waiting to jump on stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.